Welcome back. Today we're looking at a script for a YouTube video called Hilary Duff's Comeback to Music is Embarrassing AF.
And it is. It's a fiery script. But to make it work, it needs to move from just a rant into a real cultural dissection. And fast.
Exactly. The material really nails the reaction to this disconnect between her suburban mom persona and these really explicit lyrics.
But the argument just keeps getting undercut by these ad hominem attacks. It's just simple name calling.
Yeah.
That's the first big hurdle. I mean, the writers see the problem. You're expecting Lizzie McGuire, and you get lyrics about a dive bar. But then they just label Duff and her fans as having arrested development.
Or they call them undateable, or say they have no ethics.
Right. And when the script talks about Leonardo DiCaprio's blonde bimbo type, or says women who overshare are acting promiscuous, the tone just completely shifts. It stops being a critique of the art, or the brand strategy. It just becomes this personal moral judgment.
It does. And that limits the reach of the whole argument. You end up just preaching to the choir.
Exactly. You're not persuading anyone who isn't already on your side.
So the suggestion here has to be reframing those personal insults into bigger questions about, say, the commodification of intimacy.
Yes. Instead of attacking her character, probe the system she's working in.
Okay, so let's take that section on the song Mature and the whole Leonardo DiCaprio thing. The script basically mocks her for clapping back years too late.
Yeah, saying it makes her look hung up on him.
Which is a fair observation, but it's phrased like a schoolyard taunt.
It is. And does that miss the bigger picture? I think we could refine that by analyzing the strategy.
Okay.
So the question shouldn't be, why is she so obsessed? It should be, why does a star this big need to rely on a decades-old relationship for clout in 2024?
Right. Is this a failure of her current branding? That makes it a business critique.
Much stronger. It moves from she's pathetic to her strategy is desperate, which is a much more defensible argument.
And the same thing applies to those comments about undateable women, the OnlyFans and podcast comparisons.
Oh, definitely. The text just attacks the women themselves. It says they have no self-respect.
It's really aggressive. It literally says, you're undateable, you have no ethics.
It is. So a more sophisticated take would be to critique the societal trend. We're seeing this shift where authenticity is getting confused with a total lack of boundaries.
And the audience is kind of eating up the discomfort as entertainment.
Exactly. So instead of saying, these women are awful, ask, does the current pop landscape require artists to sell their privacy just to compete? That pulls the viewer in intellectually.
I see what you're saying. It's pivoting from the person to the phenomenon. Okay, so let's get to the second point. There's this running theme of taking song lyrics completely literally.
Yes, and it really weakens the whole critique because it just ignores how songwriting works.
Right.
The script assumes that because she sings about giving head in a dive bar in Roommates, that she's literally doing that now.
Or that her son is going to think it's a true story from last weekend.
The script even says no she isn't and asks, are you a guy with roommates?
It's treating a pop song like a sworn deposition.
It is. And that makes the critics sound a little naive, It dilutes their very valid point about the imagery being awkward because the listener is just thinking, well, obviously it's a song, not her diary.
So how do we fix that? The idea is to acknowledge the intent of the persona first, right? Before tearing it down?
Precisely. The critique is so much stronger if you admit it's probably fiction, but then argue that the choice of fiction is what's so embarrassing.
Even if it's a character, why the specific character?
Yes. And I think you spotted that quote from the V Magazine interview in the material?
I did. Yeah. The script includes a quote where she says she wanted the song to feel polarizing and wild and free.
That's the goldmine right there. Use that. Don't ignore it. She's admitting it's a fantasy of freedom.
Okay, so the argument becomes,
she admits this is a fantasy, but the execution feels less like liberation and more like a desperate, clumsy attempt to be edgy. You validate her intent, then you dismantle the result.
And what about the whole embarrassing her husband angle?
You can pivot that too. Even if it's a fictional persona, you ask, does the brand association of a dead bedroom, which she literally sings about, harm the reality of her family life?
So it's not about whether she actually did it.
No, it's about the fact that she's selling a narrative of marital dissatisfaction to sell music. That's the critique.
I like that. It's about brand association. Okay, that lyric, I'm touching myself looking at porn because you don't even look my way. The script just calls it smut.
which for a Disney alum it kind of is. But to make the critique sharper, you acknowledge it as a character study of a failing marriage. Then you argue why that specific character study clashes so horribly with the Hilary Duff brand equity.
So the problem isn't that the lyric exists.
The problem is that Hilary Duff is singing it. It creates this cognitive dissonance. And that dissonance is the embarrassment the title is talking about.
That's a perfect transition to our third point. The script brings up these really compelling comparisons to Taylor Swift and Miley Cyrus, but then just leaves them there.
This was maybe the most frustrating part of reading this, because the potential is just sitting right there. It says the song Roommate sounds very AI and like a knockoff of Taylor Swift.
And then later it mentions that clip of Miley Cyrus refusing to act her age.
But they're just throwaway lines. It calls the song a pick-me song and moves on.
Right.
But if you weave those comparisons through the whole script, they become a kind of control group for the experiment. You can show why Duff's attempt is failing where others maybe succeeded.
So with the Taylor Swift knockoff comment, you can't just say it.
You have to ask why. Why does it feel like a knockoff? Is it the production? The confessional style? You argue that Swift's confessions feel current, while Roommates feels like an imitation of a trend that just doesn't fit her life stage.
And the Miley comparison, the script mentions her on the red carpet.
That's a fascinating parallel. Miley rebelled in her early 20s. It was her can't-be-tamed era. It made sense on her timeline. So what if you ask the question,
why is Duff having her rebellion moment at 38?
Yes, is this a delayed rebellion? And is that why it feels so inauthentic?
That frames it as a developmental delay, not just bad behavior. It makes the embarrassing claim much more solid. It's embarrassing because it's out of sequence.
Exact. And there's that visual element, too. The script mentions the rain machine in the video.
Yeah, it says she's calling back to the Come Clean song.
Let the rain fall down, right? But we can go deeper than just calling back. She is visually quoting her younger, most innocent self while lyrically trying to demolish that very image.
With lines about porn and dive bars.
The visual dissonance is the whole story. She's signaling nostalgia with her eyes and edgy adult with her mouth.
That's a brilliant way to put it. That's the core of the failure right there.
It is. And speaking of the audience, let's get to the final piece of feedback. The script identifies this fascinating psychological profile of millennials canceling therapy to see her, but then it just mocks them so aggressively.
It really does. The writers call the fans mentally teenagers with arrested development, and they kind of sneer at the world peace healing comments.
It's a really harsh tone. And look, the observation that nostalgia is driving this tour is correct, but the tone implies that enjoying nostalgia is some kind of moral failing.
So the suggestion is to shift from mockery to more of a psychological observation.
Yes. Explore the phenomenon. Why are millennials clinging to 2003? Don't just insult them for it.
So instead of they haven't matured, you ask,
what void is this filling? Why does a 30-something want to hear about teenage angst from another 30-something? Now it's a sociological study.
There's that one quote in the text, born in the wrong time to buy a home, born just in time for Hilary Duff's career renaissance. The script just calls this sad.
It is sad, but it's also a powerful socio-political observation. Lean into that. The nostalgia is a comfort blanket for a generation facing all this economic hardship.
If the script acknowledges that context, the critique becomes so much more empathetic and intellectual.
You can still criticize the music, but you're not just punching down at the people buying the tickets.
And that brings it all back to why Roommates is such a failure.
That's the connection. If the fans are there for that comfort blanket of 2003, which the script says they are, then giving them explicit dive bar lyrics is a betrayal of that whole transaction.
So the failure isn't that the fans are stupid.
The failure is that Duff is completely misreading the room. She's selling edge to a crowd that desperately wants comfort.
That sums it up perfectly. It's a business failure.
And that is always a more compelling argument than just, these people are losers.
Let's really drill down into why this specific type of rant content fails long-term. There's this palpable sense of anger in the script. The writers seem genuinely offended by the music.
And that emotional reaction is a strength. Action. If you channel it correct, it proves that the brand betrayal we're talking about is real. The problem is, the emotion is driving the car right.
If I'm a Hilary Duff fan and the first thing I hear is an insult about people like me being undateable, I'm clicking off.
Exactly. You sacrifice all your analytical authority for a cheap laugh. And long-term, authority is what builds a channel. The writers did the hard work. They found the rain machine detail, the interview quotes. They have the evidence.
They just need to present it like a prosecutor, not a school bully.
That's it.
Okay, we've covered a lot. To recap, the script has this really strong core observation that Duff's new explicit era clashes violently with her nostalgic appeal, but it needs to ditch the playground insults to really land.
Right. We're moving from she is embarrassing to the branding is incoherent.
So the actionable steps. First, scrub all the ad hominem attacks. Undateable, no ethics. Replace them with a critique of the industry pressure to overshare.
Second, treat the lyrics as artistic choices, not a diary. Critique the persona she's chosen, not the assumption she's actually in a dive bar.
Third, really use those Taylor Swift and Miley Cyrus comparisons. Don't just name drop. Use their careers to show exactly why Duff's timing feels so off.
And finally, analyze that millennial audience with some psychological curiosity, not just disdain. Talk about the economic factors behind the nostalgia and frame Duff's new music as a betrayal of that need.
Applying those lenses will transform this script from a rant into a real review. It'll make it authoritative.
And that's where the real influence is. Take that anger, distill it into analysis, and you'll have something truly compelling.
We'd love to see how you implement these changes. Please submit the revised script or your next project for another look.
Absolutely. Keep writing and dig deeper than the easy insult.
That's it for this edition of The Critique. We'll see you next time.